Yeah, it's Friday night. We're live. I'm all hopped up. We had a power outage today in our area. They were working on something. We saw them over working on one of the, I don't know, something. There's about 15 utility vehicles over there working on wiring and stuff. And so nobody in this area we didn't have power from very early this morning until relatively recently tonight. So I wasn't able to do my live feed. I thought about doing it the morning show to get the projects going, give you a little incentive going into the weekend on the morning. And I thought about doing it on my phone, but I don't know. In the end, it just didn't seem like a good idea. So I'm here. We did got our obviously we got our electricity back, so I'm back live on the channel, as it were, using my computer. And I've done the phone before, and it works okay. Sometimes I had to do it at West Tech because the signal was bad, but it works. But tonight, what I want to talk about is I have the thumbnail that I have up, and hopefully it's not flipped upside down, Australian style, which I think is awesome. By the way, shout out to everyone watching in Australia, because I want to tell you why why my Australian brethren are always welcome here. I read a thing. So I read this was I don't like an Instagram post or something. It said pig in Australia steals 18 beers from campers, gets drunk, and then fights cow. It sounds a little like it also could be Florida, but I think that it's awesome, even if it's not real. It's something that you would believe is like, oh, that would be awesome if that actually happened. And if it happened in Australia, you could see, he's got a little bit of attitude. He's got a couple too many drinks, and he wants to go pick a fight with somebody, which I think is awesome. The thumbnail that I put up is the Trail 90 intake manifold. As you can see, fairly simple aluminum, 2 flanges on it. It's kind of a 90-ish degree elbow. I'll see if I think that's probably right. We'll go to the tail of the tape here. And here is our elbow. Yeah, it's about it. Yeah, it's got to be pretty close to a 90 degrees. Just got 2 2-bolt flanges on it, which would be fairly easy to change. We just make another flange. And you can see it has an insulator on it, which is another subject I want to talk about. I made a post today simply asking a question, and it's interesting the responses that you get and the preconceived notions that people have when you ask a simple question. When you ask a question, they read all kinds of stuff into it. So the post today was somebody that it is usually here and comments a lot on a lot of the videos that I do. So shout out to Zane, who is a loyal viewer. Zane's awesome. But he made a post about an LSA supercharger and about using some sort of insulator or spacer that they use to maybe raise the plenum up that has the intercooler core and stuff, and maybe also spacers or isolators that help elevate the intake manifold, maybe away from the intake or from the cylinder heads, radiating heat or transferring heat into the aluminum intake blower. And so I said, having never tested an LSA and only looked at one kind of from afar when I was doing some testing with the guys from Kenny Bell. So I was looking at that, and I haven't not tested it and torn it apart 15 or 20 times like you have to when you do testing. I've looked at it just when we were doing a swap and taking off the factory blower and putting on a Kenny Bell, which obviously it's a bigger, more efficient supercharger, so it added a lot of power. That's kind of a no-brainer deal. I didn't look at the factory stuff in the way that I would in an analytical way to try to see if there was a way to improve that. Obviously other people have, and so they've come up with these insulators and spacers, which one would add plenum volume, the other would isolate the lid, as it were. And so my question was simply, like they were saying, yeah, this makes power. And I'm like, okay, well, my question to myself and then my comment was, okay, what does it do? What are these spacers are supposed to do? If somebody's selling these, what is their thing? What are they promoting? What are they saying that it does? And then a lot of the responses I got, well, now you can physically touch the lid and it's not nearly as hot. Okay, that's something. That's actually good information. And that it's supposed to isolate the blower assembly, I guess, the intake manifold for the blower away from the heat generated by the cylinder heads. Okay, so I get that. And all I do is ask a question like, what does it do? I don't know. Not because and they're reading into, oh, well, he doesn't believe that it works, or that he's questioning it, or he's not. And then they take it to the whole nother level. Watch, he's never even tested an LSA blower. He doesn't know anything. I'm like, it was just a simple question, just like a question from anybody else that would ask, like, what's going on? What does this thing do? I don't know what it does because I've never seen the part. I've never seen and never tested the engine, never taken one apart to see what it looks like. So I don't know the ins and outs of it. So I'm just like a new guy coming to not a new engine family, because obviously I know a little bit about LS stuff, but coming to a new configuration and just asking questions about, like, what does it do? What is this? What is this? What is this? All of this stuff. Obviously I bring a little bit of background into that, but I'm not asking it because I don't think that it'll work, because I think it's dumb, because I think it's silly, because I don't think it's worth money or whatever. There's no way for me to make a statement like, I didn't make a statement like that, but even if I wanted to, there would be no way for me to make a statement like that until I test it. And really that's the whole thing, is in looking at this, if people are making a claim that it does something and it's counterintuitive or it's intuitive, either way, I just want to test it. Like what does it do? And so I think I asked, well, does anybody have charge temperature measurements? Because plenum volume, and especially on a supercharged application, I'm wondering, I haven't seen that do anything. And I'm wondering if does it lower the charge temperature? If it lowers the charge temperature, then certainly we could get more power from that. That makes sense. But with as long as they've been out and if people are selling them, I'm hoping that they had tested them and have like data to back that up, which would be cool. I'd like to see that, rather than having to go out and try to beg, borrow, or steal one and test it myself. It would be good for somebody else to have data. Yeah, when we ran it back to back at 10 pounds of boost or whatever, it dropped the temperature from this number to this number, and it showed a change in mass flow from this to this. And then we had to add this much fuel, and it made this, all of that would be great. Like I'd go, okay, well, good. That sounds like you guys got everything nailed down, and it seems like it's working like it's supposed to. That's very interesting. And it may or may not be what I expected or whatever. I just want more data. So that's, but it's interesting, like I said, how far people, how many steps further away from what the actual thing was. The more that it goes, the longer the time goes, the more steps they get away from it, and the more that the story grows, and it's just interesting. But on the intake manifold, so let's talk about the intake manifold because I was thinking intake manifold on the LSA blower, and I obviously am fairly easily distracted. Look at these shiny things over here. The intake manifold on the Trail 90, and looking at that, 2 2-bolt flanges, 90-degree bend. The bend actually, although a lot of people think that it makes a difference, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. It wouldn't really make any difference if that was straight. I don't think it would add any power, quite honestly. If the runner length was the same and the taper was the same, I don't think it would do anything. But guys can argue with me about that. But it allows the carburetor to be, at the right angle relative to the ground, so that you have the float below it and stuff, and so that works. My question is, if I make an extension for that, if I make an extension between the carburetor and manifold right now, and what got me going down this route is that it has like a little phenolic spacer, probably because that fuel system is not pressurized, probably to help with the fuel boiling, probably to stop that from happening, I would imagine, so that doesn't get too hot. We have an air-cooled motor; it's not water-cooled, but this thing does have a lot of airflow over it. But all of this is kind of back behind the front tire and the forks and the, a little bit behind the front part of the engine sticking out, the head or the case or whatever. And then it has the whole air cleaner assembly, tacked onto that. So the first question is, if I take the carburetor off and make an extension, like I would go 3 or 4 inches or something, just let's take a fairly big swing at it. I'm not going to do it in half-inch increments. I don't care about that. I care about, let's do a big thing. Does it do anything? Okay, I'm looking for a yes or no. Yes, it does something, or no, it doesn't do anything. And then, okay, now if it does something and we see it, and there would be a way for me to correlate whether or not if it does something, if it does change the power, that's also going to change the signal to the carburetor. Does the change in signal to the carburetor add the extra fuel that we need? Is it self-compensating? Does it just work out, wonderfully? Not very often does that happen. Could we then overcome it with fuel pressure or jetting or whatever we want to do? So the next question is, if I don't do that, what if we put a change in runner length in front of the carburetor? Put a air stack, or just a tube with a flared entry in front of it. Would that do the same thing? The answer to that, well, we'll make that our poll. In front of this is essentially a side draft carburetor. $90. Okay, will it work too much? Let's see. Perfect. Will an intake tube in front of the side draft carburetor on the Honda Trail 90 add runner length and add horsepower? So let's see what people think. I get this question a lot, and we went through a discussion on an EFI version where it was just a throttle body and not a carburetor. But the question was, I think people have a fairly good handle on, does runner length in an intake manifold change the power curve? Most definitely it does. I've shown that a bazillion times. When you have a longer runner intake, it makes more low-speed power, whatever that number is, low. And when it's a shorter runner intake manifold, it makes more power on the top. And that's, I think, pretty well understood. The question that I got was, well, on a stack injection, if you change the runner length on the cylinder head side of the throttle body, they can kind of understand how that changes runner length. But their question was, what happens if we change the runner length on the front side of the throttle blade? The stack in front of the throttle blade. Does that do anything? Now, it should be fairly obvious to people that have done any kind of research on this. If you look at the Crowder, Hillborn, those kinds of stacks that were used back in the day on the old Can-Am stuff, they made different lengths. And people will tell you that they made different lengths because the big block cylinder heads were different lengths. They also made it for other reasons too. They also made it because they were changing the RPM range of the motor. They also did it for fitment because all the tubes, the radius air horns of the tubes wouldn't fit together, which is why they kind of angled them all cattywampus. They had good runners and bad runners in the heads. But changing that stack length on both sides of a throttle blade on a fuel injected motor definitely changes the power. So now I'm going to throw you another curveball. That definitely changes the power. So you're like, well, Richard, you just answered the question for us. Did I or didn't I? Here's another thing. If you have a carbureted application, like let's say dual plane carbureted application, and you change and you put an air stack on that, let's say a length of tubing and a radius entry. A radius entry can definitely help the carburetor. It can definitely help the signal to the carburetor. That can improve power. We've shown that many times, where that's just basically an airflow thing. But I can tell you that the tube on top of a carburetor does not change the runner length of the intake manifold. So in that situation, it's not a change in runner length, and it won't add any torque the way that it does when we do a long runner intake manifold. So we have different situations here. So really the question is, well, Richard, what about side draft carburetors on a Z? Well, that would answer our question for us. Well, what I can tell you is that, like on side draft Webers or Delordos or Makunis on a any kind of application, but I'm thinking on the 240, 260, 280Z motors, on the L series motors. If you put those on there's a short cannon manifold and a longer cannon manifold. You're kind of limited by how much room you have before you start running into shock tower and stuff over there. Probably brake booster, I think, on the backside. But if you change the stack length in front of that carburetor, it definitely changes the power. So you should have your answer. Compressed air supercharging. It's not going to be compressed air. It's going to be an electric motor. It's going to be an electric deal, like either the leaf blower or an electric smog pump. Okay, so let's see what kind of questions you guys got. We're going to have a shortened version tonight because I've got stuff I've got to get to. Oh, dang, I forgot to do my mic again. You guys should remind me. Richard, I found a set of LS heads. What to look for? Look for cracks. Look for cracks in between the valves, in between the intake and exhaust valve area. Pneumatic wrencher, back on your main account. I have made long runner intakes for a KZ 440 street tracker. I added 3, 6, and 8-inch extensions, made a big difference. Richard, get a VM22 CARB from Amazon. I'll have to look at it and see. I don't know if just a bigger carburetor is maybe the answer there. I guess I don't know how fast air transfers heat. I'm just guessing it's not the intake very long. And area intercooler is at least relatively convoluted and more mass. Yeah, when I was setting this up, I didn't choose this mic. It's still going up there, and that one's problematic. That's on me. You guys might also hear the fan in the background. I think you want a runner length to accentuate 4,000 to 8,000 RPM on the Trail 90. Power band doesn't really like start until 4,000. I'd like to get a tack on there to see what RPM the thing is running at. I think it adds power, but not in the way people think. More like David Freiberger's salad bowl. Low end to mid range, but will drop off sooner than shorter stacks. Or does it only matter after the blade? No, it matters both. Casey, I sent you an email from Makuni carbs you could use on Trail 90. Scuba compressor, 5,000 PSI. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. Tony Pepperoni. That's a great name. So a long runner does add torque. Yes, it always does that. Quad 4s have the header looking intake. Yeah, I've seen a couple of imports that are like that. The VM22 works good. I had one on my Trail 90. I need a way to measure that, though. I need to see what the air fuel is. I need at least an air fuel meter on there. I don't think we can run that on. I don't think that motor doesn't make enough power to run on a chassis dyno. I don't think adding a longer tube to the front side of the 90 carburetor will help because the diameter of the tube has to be so. Why does the tube have to be so large? The opening of the throttle body or the opening of the carburetor is not very big. Can you find a radiator hose with a 7-degree taper? I bet we can, Dan. I bet one of the factory ones, I'll bet has some sort of weird taper to that. We see that all the time. So does a snorkel add torque? It does if you add it to an internal combustion engine. Have to be a single cylinder one though, and something that has a fairly small cylinder head. Richard, I give you $20 for the shirt. Please wash it first. What is the relationship between intake runner length and cam LSA? Can they be matched for most torque down low or most horsepower up high? Not specifically the LSA. The intake runner length is going to help determine what RPM range the motor is efficient in. And so kind of is the cam, but not just LSA, though. The duration has a lot to do with that as well. Buy a cheap narrowband O2 sensor and gauge and weld the bung in the pipe. That's what I'll do. I think I'll try that when I'm down at West Tech. Even one of the little old LED BZ meters that we had back in the day, that would be fine for what I'm doing. I would be looking for fairly big sweeping things anyways. I have a 1-inch phenolic spacer and a 1-inch throttle body spacer for my 5-liter BBK throttle body, so a total of 122 millimeters. Is your 5-liter EFA dual throttle body, is that a truck manifold that you have on there? $30 for the shirt if I sign it. Actually, it's worth less if I sign it, isn't it? A snorkel, if you stop thinking about it at JF, you stop thinking about it as a snorkel and just thinking about it as runner length. I don't know what the runner length is going to be on a snorkel, but if you cut that snorkel in half and made it short, it would make less low speed power than it would in the long version. Because that's what runner length does. And we are split exactly at 50-50. Will an intake tube in front of the side draft carburetor on a Honda Trail 90 add runner length and add horsepower? So half are saying yes and half are saying no. A Kawasaki CG1000 and try to run it without the air filter box. Put a spacer in front of the carb to hold the air cleaner. Did not run good. You guys port the Edelbrock intake for it to over 3. They get 300 CFM per runner on that on a 5-liter. Jay, like a harp string? No, much more like an organ pipe. If you have different length organ pipes and you excite them by hitting them, they resonate at different frequencies, and that's exactly what's happening here. Arc Trail 90 has 7 horsepower, so 10% improvement is less than 1 horsepower, 7/10 of a horsepower. Okay, what does that mean in measurable terms? Well, we talked about that last night. A 25% increase in top speed requires 100% improvement in power. So whatever the top speed is of the vehicle, and same thing with a Trail 90, you can use that equation. This probably would be less effective in the low speed range that we're talking about, because it had more to do. It would have, at this speed, it would have less to do with aerodynamics, because we're not really into the aerodynamic portion of things yet, only at 45 miles an hour. So weight and resistance and other things are still coming into play. But after a certain point, you know, if you're going 150, that's to the point where the biggest thing that you're dealing with is power versus aero. Alan, so you saw the Engine Masters today with Freiberger and Dulcich and doing the 1540 deal. That's an older one, but that was a lot of fun. Have you tested a 351 with an Edelbrock truck manifold? I have not. Jeff Smith's in the house. Jeff Smith, are you the Jeff Smith that I just saw drag racing? You have is your car orange? Does an aluminum intake tube that has an inlet air temperature sensor make a difference when it gets hot and making the computer cut timing? Not if it's measuring the air temperature inside the tube. The temperature of the tube itself is not really going to affect the temperature inside of it. All the guys running Hilborn stack injections back in the day will tell you adjusting stack length is part of tuning for horsepower versus torque. It is. It definitely is. Shorter stack length adds more power on top, and longer ones add more down low. And those are relative terms. By down low, I might mean from 6,500 and lower. Jaybird, it is. The resonating frequency is something different. Like if you look at two drums and you hit one drum and you hit another drum that's bigger, they're going to make a different noise. And that's a resonating frequency. What I'm talking about here is primarily it has a frequency, but that's Helmholtz resonance. That's part of the runner and the plenum volume and part of the inlet size and actually part of the head and part of the, when the valve is open, part of the runner. But what I'm talking about is a reflected wave, which is different. So you have a pressure wave, a negative pressure wave that goes up the intake, and then rarefaction occurs, and then you build a negative pressure area, and that's filled in by a positive pressure. So what you have is a negative pressure wave going one way and a positive pressure wave going the other way. And if the positive pressure wave arrives at the right time, when you can improve cylinder filling, you get a gain. And so the longer the runner is, the lower the RPM has to be for it to be able to make that trip up and back and arrive at the right time. So that's why runner lengths are tuned for specific engine speeds. Is that why some stack injectors were a staggered length? Yes, you can. The other thing you can do is, and you see this a lot on single plane intake manifolds, is not every manifold is designed with the same runner length for all the cylinders. You'd think that that would be better if the head is symmetrical and flows the same and there's the same runner length and volume and all that. If the head is making the same, if you make the piston diameter and all of that is the same, and then the head is the same, you think you'd want to make the intake the same so that all the cylinders are making, each one of them is making the exact same power in the same RPM range. Because it's not just, is it making the same power? Is it always making the same power? If you change the runner length in different cylinders, which I've done before, when we have Fast has an adjustable intake manifold for the LS, And so they have different runner lengths that, stacks that you can bolt in there. So they have short and medium and long. And so we tried short, we tried medium, we tried long, and long worked the best because it has the best power up to 6,500. It makes the most average power there. The other ones will make more peak power past that, but lose a bunch down low. So everyone asked, well, did you try running some of one, like 4 of one and 4 of the other? And we did, because we were thinking, well, let's make this like a single plane intake, a single plane carbureted intake, where the outer runners are always long and the inner runners, because they're close to the carburetor and close to the head, have to be short. And so what happens is the 4 short runners, those cylinders are making power in a different RPM range. They're optimized in a different RPM range than the long ones are. So we did that and duplicated that, and it's just not a good combination. It did best with the long runners. Tony, I think for every 1 inch of runner, it bumps where the power peaks would otherwise be an average of 350 RPM. There's no average like that. There's no direct correlation number like that. And in my testing, a 1 inch doesn't do it by 350 RPM. Does a short runner, like on a Weber carb, help with fuel mix? A short stack, the longer the stack is and the longer the intake is, the better the signal to the carburetor is going to be. So in that situation, just like with a dual plane will flow more fuel through the carburetor than it will on a single plane, especially through most of the curve. When the signal starts getting good from the single plane at higher RPM, where it starts wanting to make more power, then the signal gets better to the carburetor. And the same thing would happen with Weber carburetors. Dan, I went through that already. A 25% increase in speed requires a 100% increase in power. If you supercharge your Trail 90, you'll probably have to do a draw-through setup. But we won't do a draw-through setup because I'm going to use an electric smog pump or just a leaf blower. So we won't do a draw-through setup. But we will have to pressurize the fuel system. That's why I said single cylinder with a snorkel, because the snorkel, you don't want the snorkel breathing like 8 cylinders breathing through one snorkel, but one cylinder that if each one of them had that, the longer that it is, that's just an intake tube basically. Richard, you should build a big block driven power generator for when the power goes out. When God designed this Lancet, you think he's responsible for that design? He made 3 different runner lengths on the intake manifold so he could spread the area under the curve. He actually did that because of essentially mounted carburetor, but yeah, we could go with the Divine thing too. Does runner shape determine anything? Yeah, if it has taper to it, it changes things. And there are some shapes that are more efficient relative to the surface area than others. Mighty Car Mods put a turbo on a moped. What size was it? A 50cc moped? And what size turbo? Where did they find that? Tony, there's no direct, easy formula for runner length and RPM. My 86 NA RX-7 changes from 2 runners to 4 long ones. Yeah, that does have a variable runner intake manifold. And Brian, if you get rid of that, you will, because a lot of times guys do that. They do that with the Ford had that, the Taurus had that. The Cobra one, the early Cobra one, had the Emmerich plates on it and stuff, and they did it to enhance low speed power. And a lot of guys were like, "Oh, that thing's just in the way. It's just costing me airflow." Well, what they did is get rid of all the low speed power. So I think you should keep that there because you'll always have the short runners to make more power. Tony, I raced at Irwindale with a Dodge B300 van with a small block 360 and a 250 shot. That's a lot. So we're still at 50-50. We got 82 votes. So right at 50-50. I think that the runner length in front of the carburetor is not going to do anything. Jim, in Australia, the mailman, right? They rode Trail 90s. What was your favorite boosted car that you've owned? I did a lot of stuff in the supercharged Mustang because it was the only car I had for a long time, and so we had a lot of fun in that, running it at the Silver State and out at the Foxtrot and running it at El Mirage and I drove it to Fort Stockton for a top speed shootout for road and track, and so we did a lot of cool things with that. I really like the Sprint too. That I had a turbo Sprint that we set land speed records with. And every one of these things that I've had, obviously, we've done modifications to, and they've gotten better. And the Sprint only made it made less than 70 horsepower at the tire when I first got it, and then we got it up to, I think we made 120 at the tire with a stock turbo, and then I ended up on a compound setup making 174 or 5, I think. And that Civic, right? Oh, this one right here. This one, I really like this car. That one went 226, 227. Would dry ice cooling the intake temps do something? It would do more if you could use it to cool like boosted air going through an intercooler. Wouldn't putting an elbow on a carburetor and a long intake tube for a cold air essentially be the same thing on a car? It's not on a car because if you think about an LS, the runner length goes up and into a common plenum. That's where this rarefaction or rarefaction occurs. That's when it changes. It goes up and the negative pressure wave expands out into the common plenum. So having a tube in front of that is not going to stop that from happening. You have a secondary thing that could happen with the tube, especially on 4-cylinders. Hondas are kind of notorious for that. The length of the tube and the diameter and all that make a big difference, and they have an effect on the power curve. On the testing that I've done on the dyno, the air inlet tube in front of I think I was doing it on a truck manifold, it didn't seem to really care very much. As long as we had enough flow going in and I didn't restrict it down to a 2.5 inch, I think, which is one of the things that we tested. But I went 2.5 and 3 and 3.5 and 4, and I don't think we did 4.5. I think 4 was as big as I did. But then I tried different lengths, and it didn't seem to affect it the way that I thought it was going to, which is why we test. When I do that on a B16 Honda, it definitely has an effect. A long runner like AEM kind of air intake makes a different power curve than a short runner filter on a stick kind of thing. Makes a big difference. So if you have a common plenum and the runner goes up into the common plenum, that's the end of the runner length. It's not tube in front of it. Tube in front of it can change Helmholtz resonance. Not a runner question. I found a set of LS heads with 300,000 miles on them. What to look for before I think we went through that already. The speed, actually, the Civic was really, really easy to drive at that speed. It was not a problem at all. It's much better than trying to drive a Mustang or a Camaro at that speed. So, Tony, you have a Winnebago that you're drag racing? Oh, I was referring to a carbureted vehicle. A carbureted vehicle is going to be the same thing, though. The rudder length is going to end in a common plenum. Like if you look at a single plane, and even a dual plane has a common plenum. It just usually has two of them, unless you have a cutout divider between those two. It'd also be interesting to adjust the timing of the Trail 90, add the modified stator plate on two-stroke dirt bikes in the late 80s. I haven't even checked it. It's one thing I need to check. I've had people tell me, and I've gone online to see what people have been done with the Trail 90s, and some of the guys are saying that their stock ones will go more than 50 miles an hour, and mine won't do that. Brian, wish me luck. I'm pulling my first truck engine for an LSWeb. Good. You'll always remember your first time. Ooh, our yeses are up to 51%. How high does a Trail 90 rev to? I don't know. I don't have a tack on it. Doesn't higher revving engines benefit from longer runners? It's the reverse of that, actually. Short runners for high RPM, long runners for low RPM. Two things I want to do on the Trail 90. One is I want to do I've seen online guys are doing the front shock rebuilds on it. I want to do that because I think that these are fairly soft. And then I also want to I want to verify the timing on it. Jay, so if reflected wave is a factor, it's not if, it definitely is. And that's why some people aren't as concerned with hogging out the throat behind the exhaust valve. No, that's not accurate. The reflected wave is intake valve, and the exhaust valve also has a reverse reflected wave, which starts out as a positive pressure wave and is reflected back as a negative pressure wave, which helps scavenge air during overlap, which scavenges air from the induction side into the combustion chamber. What's happening with the exhaust side is a whole different thing, but this reflected wave that I'm talking about has nothing to do with the exhaust port or the exhaust valve. Is it fair to say that long runner takes are good for response in the 3,000 to 7,000 range? Well, it depends on what our definition of long runner is. On an LS, a fast intake manifold, which would classify as a long runner manifold, is going to be the best manifold for a cathedral port, is going to be the best manifold that you can get. It will make the most average power, let's say up to 7,000 RPM. And then beyond that, shorter runners like the High Ram or ProFlow or everybody has, like Brian over BTR, Holly has short ram stuff. So if you want to run lots of RPM, 8,000, 8,500 RPM, then you can run these short runner ones. There's a few guys running VW transporters and drop side trucks in the 36 horsepower challenge. I think that that's an interesting thing. A couple of guys have talked to me about that 36 horsepower challenge deal at Bonneville. Richard, I'm not sure if I mentioned it before. A CT90 has to have a battery for the ignition system to operate. Yeah, mine does have a battery. Have you done the test and modified the exhaust at the same time to see how scavenge is affected by the runners? Have I done changes to exhaust systems to see what the effect of scavenging is from an exhaust system change? Yes. Header length is a really good example of that. If we run a shorter header that's the same primary diameter and we run a long tube header, the scavenging effect from the long tube will make a lot more average power than a short runner will, than a short runner exhaust will, a shorty header or stock exhaust manifold. And a lot of people think that that's because it's flow, and that's not the case. Again, just like with intake manifolds, we can have a shorty header that flows more exhaust than a long tube does, but makes a lot less power through the whole range because of all of these scavenging waves that improve power that are not just the exhaust flow coming out. What if I forgot to put the insert runner in my 3800 Series 2? The inserts in the intake manifolds in the NA ones, I have a video up where we tested it so you could see exactly what it does. The inserts in the NA intake manifolds, if you take them out, they shorten the runner length and they make less power down low. And they did make more power on top, though, because of the short runners. I had one of those Hondas years ago. Getting a CB90 CARB helps a lot. No, Jay, we're here. Everybody's here to learn. We got a lot of sharp people here. Does back pressure at the collector on short headers affect that? The reason that short headers don't make power that long tubes do has nothing to do with back pressure. What benefits are there to having a triple disc clutch torque converter to a single? It just means it'll hold more power once the lockup converter is engaged. JBO will make you a shorty for the T90. I think I could do that myself since it's only one. Specialized. Oh, my Trail 90 took out the air box and adapted a small K&N filter. It did give it power all around. So you measured the power change? I am gonna make a Super Ritchie ram air for it first and see what that does. I'm gonna make a 90-degree bend that will facing the front of the bike for airflow to grab pressurized air going into the carburetor. We'll see if it works. It was a factory DZ302 intake manifold, dual or single plane. It was the factory one was a high. It's a dual plane. It's a high-rise dual plane is what I try to think. They also had a dual quad cross ram for it, but they did not have a single plane. Have you done any testing on carburetor splitters on the inside of the intake side? So you want to put a divider in the head port? Is that what you're doing? It's supposed to change the low end, high end power by having a metal piece in the intake. So you want to divide the intake manifold. I've seen that done on the. If you look at the elbows way back for 462 valves, Dragon I think had those. And we tested those on the dyno, but again, like on that application, you're just dividing the airflow and not dividing it equally to an intake manifold that's also divided. You're just dividing it into a common plenum. So it's really not going to do very much. If you were dividing it evenly, and this would especially be the case on a pressurized application, if you could divide it so that all the airflow, which wants to stack against the back wall of a turn anyway, if you could divide it evenly and distribute it evenly into a carburetor or into the engine, that would potentially be good. But I'd like to see the Buell thing. I'm just not familiar with it. I knew Jay Biddle at Texas A&M. I've met Jay a few times. He's a good guy. Single plane is a bottom end killer. Yeah, single plane never nearly as good as a dual plane for not just for the street, for any down low, it doesn't make as good a power as it does up top. Have you tested X pipes, Y pipes, H pipes, and no pipes? I have not. I think that the Engine Masters guys did that though, right? Will there be some ignition timing adjustments on the Trail 90? There should be, yeah. Don't dismiss the butt cheek dyno. I don't, but it's just not, it's not as accurate. A lot of times when we do things, like I thought for sure that putting more tire pressure in this thing was going to be faster, and we want it to be, and it does it feel that way, or do we want it to feel that way? That's why measured stuff is just much better. The Turbo Sprint must have been fun to drive. I've had 5, cool. 2 white and red, 2 white and 3 red. Mine was red. Still have a red one bone stock. I do want to do sprint testing because I have a bunch of parts for the sprint. I have I have forged rods, forged pistons. I have a bunch of stuff that I had gathered together that when we were going to build the motor. I have another complete motor that we're going to try to run on the engine dyno. And I like I said, I have a complete motor that came out of that car that we set the records with. And then I have stuff to build another one. And then I have forged rods for that and forged Weisscoes and all kinds of stuff. E85 on the Trail 90, we definitely would need a different carburetor for that. But it's not necessary because it's low compression and it's NA. So what's the answer about a long tube before the carb? I think it will act the same as a change in intake runner length behind the carburetor. Dan, a goofy dual plane that McFarlane did was the twisted one, right? What the heck was that thing called now? It was the twisted torque or the torque tube or something like that, right? On a live tech talk, you recommended a BTR Stage 2 cam for my Gen 453 in a Suburban, and it's night and day difference. I want to say thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't go any bigger than that, especially in a Suburban, but that should work good. Does the 90 rev out, or does it lack power to go faster? It won't go any faster than what I'm going when we're going 45. That's as fast as we've gone. I don't think it's out of RPM. I don't know what that RPM is. Crucial for Honda performance, proper valve adjustment. I've seen YouTube videos on that. Timing and good valve springs. Timing on the Magneto Hondas is done by point adjustment. That's what I thought. I think that this is a points motor. Peak output on the CT90 is at 8,000 RPM. I just want to get a tack on it now. Look up a picture of a Honda Super 90. See, that's what I need. But my Super I want it to be supercharged. Then take us twice as long as the CT90. See, I think that the intake is going to help. And then if I was really cool, I'd make a sliding trumpet, just like the Mazda rotary. Spray the Trail 90. How are you going to get a nitrous kit that only makes 1 extra horsepower, 2 extra horsepower? 2 more minutes. I guess I could do some porting on it maybe. The other thing I'm wondering about is the exhaust. I don't know if the factory exhaust would be restricted, but maybe a freer flowing exhaust is the way to go. Hydrazine. Just boost an extra fuel would be wonderful. Two strokes do, yeah. Need exhaust expansion chambers. Patiently waiting to hear about the Chrysler 2.5. I don't think methanol is going to add any power to that motor. I just don't think it has what it needs to take advantage of that. My Trail 90 would go 55 easy. I see people talking about that, but judging by what this one goes, I haven't seen that. Trail 90 is not a 2-stroke; it's a 4-stroke. I could make a straight pipe. That'd be really easy to do. There's a 455 Pontiac 4-bolt main. Yeah, if you have one of those, that's probably a very desirable block. When will all the results be announced? The results for what? For whether or not the Trail 90 works? I have to test it. I have not experimented with hydrazine. I have done testing with propylene oxide, things like that, but not hydrazine. It's too volatile, and I wouldn't ever try it in anything. Straight pipe doesn't do much on the Trail 90. It just doesn't have enough. Just don't think it has enough power. I don't think it's lacking in exhaust flow, but yeah, I'm always up for trying stuff. KE 100, yeah, 100 is a big difference. My CL 100 would go on the freeway without any problem. Maybe you have a lower range sprocket on your Trail 90. That's why I need a tach to see what RPM range you're running at. A Hayabusa engine would be good for the 90. Grind down the cylinder. '72 Kawasaki F7, the 175, 17 horsepower. My brother had a 175 Kawasaki. It was a low to mid 70s also, and I sold my to Todd the. I guess we kind of traded. I had a DT 125 Yamaha. Coming up on the last minute, I'm going to close out our thing at our poll at 53% saying yes. They think that the tube will help it. That's going to be pretty easy to make on the front side of it, much easier than making an extension for the intake manifold, but either one will be pretty easy. You'll get a go-kart tack. Middle of the head, grind the back of the lobes to correct the lash. Find a CBCL SL90 carb on eBay. You want to change your vote? No, it's not a 2-stroke. The Trail 90 is a 4-stroke. Casey, you have a Yamaha RX50? Send me a picture of it. I want to see what it looks like. I used to ride a little Honda 50 all up in Tahoe when we lived up there. It was pretty cool. I like the 50s. I like the 70s. I would like to have a whole family of the trail bikes. That would be kind of cool. An old mini bike would be cool too. The old, like a Briggs and Stratton one. This one has a high-low range. Okay, guys, it's Friday night. It's time to go. You guys got stuff to do, right? I know I do. 8:10. Yes, it is. It's time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will be back in the morning. I'm sure. I'm not sure, but I'm hoping that we still have our that they don't turn off our electricity again in the whole neighborhood, because that was not good. Everyone's outside kind of complaining about it. And it was just kind of in our area too, which is weird. But we're back, so I will be back tomorrow. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you. Have a good weekend, or I'll just see you tomorrow morning.